Kanyihamba was a person who would speak out his mind, irrespective of who is wronged. That's why you saw altercations of him with traffic officers, because he was that kind of person. So I think he has served this country with excellence, and we can only learn from him. He, of course, he has left a world of knowledge for people. He has authored so many books, and even some of his later publications, you can, if you've heard him speak, you can seem like he was talking. So may God rest his soul in eternal peace. He has done his part.
Let's hear from your charity. Tribute to the two sons of Uganda we lost this week.
Okay, so because George has done a commendable job on Kanyihamba, I will attempt Professor Lubovi. Professor was down to earth man, very humble, and he taught in Dar es Salaam, he taught in Toronto, even at Makerere while he served with the people that he served with. He's remembered for having been humane. And so losing him at this stage actually is an indictment on Makerere University, because Makerere should come up with a mechanism of looking at those professors that leave the university and engage them, get them to publish more, get them to be engaged. This professor served with Makerere from 1970. So if you look 1970 up to date, how much would Makerere have generated from a brain that was so known for mathematics? A country where you're saying you want to shift to sciences and you want to have less of arts. Here was a magnificent brain in mathematics. How much did you use of his brain to come up with innovations? How much did you put him to encourage students, just like you've heard of Professor Kanyihamba? Professor Kanyihamba, like they have told you, he was a legal scholar, and that is why he didn't find a problem that after being a Supreme Court judge, he would still go to court to defend and stand and be a jurist, because once you're a lawyer, once you're an advocate, that's it. Your job, number one, is to defend, just like a journalist. It doesn't matter. When we had, what is his name, the one that was on Voice of America? Shaka. No matter wherever he was, he still reported the story as it is supposed to be reported. So it is very important for us to always work with the good brains that we have as a country while they still live. And let those good brains be rubbed off on students, on Uganda as a country. Let us just not leave them to go to waste. That once they leave the university, that's the end of the story. So you have seen that when he took over as Vice-Chancellor, Makerere was going through a very difficult time, and I think Professor Barnabas hinted on that. And he managed to steer the university back on track and get it into its spot of research and putting out research. Remember, he had been abroad and he was very good at research, and he wanted to promote research. But the thing with him is that he was also a mathematician. Before I say he was a mathematician. So people like my friend Dombo, show-offs who just walk around throwing weight. You must sense that they are there. Of course, not Honorable Dombo, but many people of his color.
Well, when you mentioned the weight, I thought,
all pan
you're landing on him like what? Let's hear from Honorable Dombo. Your quick, comments on the two gentlemen who passed on.
May his soul and that of Justice Kanyihamba rest in
Amen.
I had the opportunity to interact with the two professors. Professor Lubovi, when I was a member of parliament, and Professor Kanyihamba throughout my life. I was interested in his methods of work, very candid, the way he communicated. And when you read stories about how he used to interact and discuss in government, you do see that he was a man in his own caliber. Towards the end of last year, he sent me an invitation to go and visit, to be one of the guests at the launch of his foundation. And he sent me, I can call it a compendium, but it was a collection of books which you were supposed to pay for. And when I returned, after Christmas, even this year, somebody from the foundation again came to my office at the NRM Secretariat with a collection of books. I didn't have money then, but I told them, I said, these books are good for the people of Uganda, especially to the people who come to the NRM Secretariat. I said, as director, I'm going to pay for these books, but come for the money when I get it. And indeed, when I got the money, I paid for the books. But I've since read part of it, and I've known that just buying one set is not enough. I've asked the Secretary General that we should get some money and buy a good collection of books so that the people who come later will be able to read about those great men of this world. The Bazungu brought something called the retirement. And in many countries, professors are like wine. The older they become, the better they are, apart from the frail age and the weak bodies. But they are brilliant. They use their brains until such a time that perhaps somebody becomes unwell and cannot share his knowledge. It's high time that we created opportunities, especially in our area where we have political differences, that irrespective of those, let people who are brainy, God has given them an opportunity to grow and have skills that others may not have. Let them share their experience. How did they make it? So with those few remarks, I want to remind Ugandans that at the end of the day, when we see people die, every time I look at someone who has died, when I looked at my father, when I've seen my colleagues in parliament, when I've seen the professors, sheikhs and reverends and bishops, it reminds us that our ultimate destination is death. And while we are on the journey, let's find out how we relate in a way that we don't leave acrimony or a bad taste in the people's mind before we die. May their souls rest in eternal peace.
Right, Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1, the FM 90 review major events of the week. There we've just been paying tribute to the two great sons that we lost. That's Professor George Wilson Kanyehamba, former Supreme Court judge, and Professor Livingstone Lubobi, who was Vice Chancellor of Makerere between 2004 and 2009. Now let's take a break. When we return, full blast, begin with the NRM primaries to understand what exactly happened and how this shapes the political party going into the next election. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Keep your comments coming by the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Xtra live on Radio 1 FM 90. Reviewing the major events of the week, I have a panel of three. Honorable Emmanuel Lumala-Dombo, Director of Information at the NRM Party Secretariat. Ms. Charity Kalebu, Executive Director, Electoral Law
Kalebo, not Kalebo.
Thank you very
She's
much.
Kalebo.
You know, that is why
George
I like Musisi.
Musisi, lawyer and member of the
knows how to
National
pronounce
Unity Platform Party. Musisi has been practicing.
He's also my friend from a long time.
Right.
Musisi or Isaokachi?
Gentlemen and ladies,
Charity is in green, so she's more inclined to go to yellow than to red.
I'm telling you. All right, let's begin our discussion. And I want to begin with you, Charity, because of your experience as an election observer, and also you are not partisan on this table. Honorable Dombo, NRM, Musisi, NUP, they might trade their blows much later. But let's hear from the expert's opinion. You looked at what transpired in the NRM primaries. There was that version before 2021 where we saw utensils and other things flying, bullets being fired here and then. But let's hear now from you on this particular NRM primaries. As an expert in election matters, what did you see? Did you like what you saw? Or there are issues that you think needed to be handled better?
So I always like to start at congratulations for where I know some things were done. And I think the first place is that there were very many people that expressed interest to participate in the NRM elections. That's a congratulations to them. And secondly, they came up with what they called a voters register, but a register that was not followed. And thirdly, they also decided to conduct elections in 72,000 villages. The Electoral Commission had indicated that there were going to be 80,000 villages, but I was kind of taken aback when I saw the NRM conducting elections in 80,000 villages. Now, of course, the scale of election was a grand election, like it was big. Even I, in commenting about it, I do know that it is possible to comment with my small sample space that I worked with, which were just 40 polling stations. But that sample space would have a large margin of error. Now, whenever you're dealing with statistics, it is important to have a smaller margin of error. Why? Because you want to be as exact as possible. One of the things that the NRM had as a problem was the numbers. The numbers at the various polling stations were fluctuating and a bit too many. I will delve into a bit of those numbers and tell you that. But they also had a problem with violence. They also had a problem with bribery. They had a problem with death. Some people died. And then they had a problem of dropping and appointing registrars 1 or 2 days before the election. What that does when you drop or change faces during election, during the moment of election, is to affect the trust levels for the process. That people begin to come to the process with mistrust. Now, when it gets to bribery, that one, you saw the money in various places. There's Hanifa Kawea's constituency where people were saying we are getting 10,000, whoever receives, you join the line. But that was not the only place where we saw money that was exchanging hands for people to go onto the line. We also saw students voting, and I have seen NRM saying that in Ruhinda constituency, they also took note of the fact that students participated in the process of lining up, and that tells you very well that what we saw with them deviating from the voters' register, not verifying the voter before they went onto the line, was a big issue. And then the death, and NRM has said they might revisit that election in Ruhinda. But it was not the only place that they are saying they are going to revisit. They have also said that they are going to revisit the election in Namutumba. Many places of Namutumba were quite affected, and they have said that they are also going to, I think about 2 or 3 places in eastern Uganda, they are going to revisit the elections, and they cancelled them because the counting was not proper. The vote recount was also ordered for Bugabla North and Buzaya, because in those 2 constituencies, the proper process of counting was not followed. That means that even the NRM itself has recognized that there are places where the process was not clean. But coming off the major process, and I think that going forward, the NRM needs to do what we call an audit in the 72,000 villages. I'll come back with the numbers on the next chance for you will give me. But I want NRM to audit its own process and compare 2021 to 2025. They had the same issues. Violence was an issue in 2021. Bribery was an issue in 2021. It is an issue in 2025. And people are saying if you don't have money, you can't win an election. People announcing themselves and being mistrust after lining up. You know, lining up is the one process where everybody should know what the result is. But Remy Yaga and Sechkubo, he's contesting the results. He's saying what he saw on the ground is different from what was announced. Now, how does that happen? when do results change? Ojara's constituency, the Madi burnt tires last night. They walked all around singing the Madi anthem because they are upset about the process. Aivu was contentious from the time the election was beginning to start. So I think that in terms of the audit process, they need to go to all the hotspots, but also go to all the other 72,000 polling stations that they put up and audit what happened. But I want to congratulate the voter. The NRM voter gave me the audacity to come back and sit on this microphone and talk, because I had lost hope, thinking people don't know why they need to vote. People don't know that power actually belongs to them. People don't know that they have the ability to drop a minister and it will stay the way it is. And it happened with NRM. I saw Bahati being blocked during campaigns, and it didn't stop at that. He had to pack his bags and go home. But he's not the only minister. Musa Echweru had to pack and go. The Kaduchu, they told her, you've been in education. We first sent Muyingo to go. You thought we were joking. Education is not doing well. Ask the people of down here. We are seeing the jobs you're doing. I was so happy that the voters were even asking questions. They asked the Honorable Kamuntu, me, I was born in this village in 1979. You've been a minister and you've been a member of parliament. But my children, you told me to take them to school. I took them to school. They don't have jobs. And you're back asking me to give you a vote. Surely I bring you back to parliament. He might have won, but these are significant questions that the voters were putting across. And for me, that gave me courage to come and sit on this microphone, because it means that in 2026, which is around the corner, they can still go back and even change their mind away from the NRM candidates whom they brought and give another person who is coming as independent, who has brought a better agenda for them, or who is presenting themselves as people who will promote and cause development. So I want to congratulate everyone that voted in the National Resistance Movement election yesterday. They did a commendable job. All right,
we'll be coming back to you, like you said, to dig deeper on some of those issues. But now, let's shift our gears and go to Mr. George Musisi. Mr. George Musisi, by now, from what we are seeing now, NUP at least knows the kind of people it's going to contest with in some of these constituencies. Someone was actually telling me earlier today that, going by what happened, at least 60% of the members of parliament in the 12th parliament have been already determined, given the fact that NUP is not visible in some places. But let's hear how you perceived the NRM primaries.
Well, I will not paint a rosy picture like Charity has done.
You speak facts. You don't have to paint a rosy picture.
You don't need to paint anything. Just say.
I will not. Despite the host turning himself into a director's lieutenant, I will continue with my submission. First of all, there have always been theories. Mr. Museveni, the NRM chairman, has always presented a theory that the opposition disrupts elections, that it carries out vote rigging, and so on and so forth. He has always attributed the violence, the rigging, the malpractices in elections to the opposition. Now, in an internal election of NRM, you would expect those issues not to happen because there are no opposition people voting. The other theory is from us. We have already said that NRM has never had the goodwill to organize a free and fair and credible election. So if it comes to those two contesting theories, at least our theory is proven right. I've had at least 6 losing people, including people who have been very vocal in attacking NUP, like Mr. Hood was saying. I've had their reaction to their loss. They are saying there was vote rigging, there was falsified declaration forms, there was widespread intimidation, and so on and so forth. So if you look at some of the claims that we've always had in the general elections, they have the bad claims. They were at play in the NRM primaries. The interference by security agencies. We even had the unfortunate scenario where someone was shot dead in Remiaga and up to date, despite the IGP camping there, no person has been charged. Yet these people were coming from a known UPDF unit. So, of course, we saw violence in scattered parts of the country, including an MP who was, I saw bleeding, Yonam Senguzi. But then, you are talking about the person talking about your theories that the 60% what. I also, I hope the doctor will tell us the turn up. I drove around Kampala Metropolitan yesterday and I saw that the election was, the turn up was akin to a prefectorial election.
How was it in Xtra?
Of course, in Xtra, they claimed that their candidate won with 19,000 votes. But if you look at, you told me to speak facts. Let me give an example of a constituency which is well known to the public by this time because of its having been in the media for a while, Kawempe North, where they claimed, and we know the election was annulled by the candidate was saying, whereas I got 9,000 votes during the badly contested election early in the year, I could have got more than 20,000. Now she won yesterday, Hajat Farida, with about 8,000 votes. So in an election of only NRM members, she got only 8,000.
Were you able also to look at the total number of NRM people in the register?
Yes, they claimed that they were about 200,000. That's what they were about to, despite the whole EC having about 200,000. So, and then the other person, the runner-up, got about 1,000. So they couldn't get even 10,000 votes. So the biggest issue for me and my biggest comment is I don't think that the NRM government, the NRM party, has the will to organize a credible election. If you hear the claims by some of the people, even some who have lost or who have won, they won through a lot of fighting. In Busoga, I think it's in Bugabla North, the MP, the sitting MP, Honorable Taylor, is saying the results were falsified by the registrar. Now, the question is, if you cannot organize a credible internal election, because NRM has all in its power to either call the statutory order, to either the NRM EC has all in its power to see that it organizes a free and fair process. But does it have the will? No. We saw Mr. Tango Doi, the chairperson, one time, not long ago, calling for the removal of one of the person who had been nominated. I think she scored a call or something. She was standing in for Bukit there, saying that no, you have not shown proof of residence in the constituency. How can a party set a higher standard than the national law? Because that is not in the requirements of the national laws. How can you set a higher standard than that? So it was, of course, whimsical. It was something that came from his own fanciful mind for purposes of punishing a particular candidate. And of course, that particular behavior translates the Gambanogu syndrome translates into the other election of the primaries, that if you are, it doesn't matter how many people you get. You know, Sechikubo has lost, I don't know whether fairly or unfairly, but we've had claims from the army of team saying that you will not win prior, and never mind that the army is supposed to be non-partisan. So if you can have that kind of bad behavior in an internal party election, then how can you have a free and fair competition when you are competing with people who are outside your family? So there's not a lot of good things to learn from the NRM primaries. You remember that last time when they were going through primaries, they abandoned the register 24 hours before the vote. This time, I think they followed it, but
not to the letter.
Not to the letter. In some, they could deviate from it. So it's a ritual which they go through because for purposes of sanitizing. But does it reflect the will of the people? That is the question. That is why I'm not buying the theory of the person who says 60%. Actually, an NRM candidate can lose in the general election despite gathering, and there are so many examples to that effect.
All right. Let's now go on and listen to Mr. Emmanuel Dombo. Mr. Emmanuel Dombo speaks for the NRM party. He can also tell us how they are actually looking at some of the issues. Honorable Dombo, the results came in. You've heard from the different constituencies. There are those who are complaining. There are those who are celebrating. But let's hear from you. You've also heard from your colleagues here on the table. as they weigh in on what transpired. Your quick response to some of these issues.
Recently, while addressing the nation, or parliament was it, the president of Uganda quoted the Monitor newspaper, and he referred to a traditional saying in the Manyankole that when you hear even the cows speaking, then what are you waiting for? I know my sister here is not a cow, but I want to tell you I'm mesmerized by her observations and her compliments to the party, how far we have gone and how the people of Uganda are civil. President Museveni has been telling people how Ugandans have transformed. That UPE is making a contribution. Universal secondary education is making a contribution. And now the people can make judgment by themselves. They can vote out a minister, they can throw out a member of parliament who is not listening or who is failing to deliver on their services. They can even throw out a government which is not accountable to the people. This is something that was deliberately built by the National Resistance Movement when they made the Constitution, and it was written, power belongs to the people, who shall determine how they want to be governed through regular, free and fair elections and referenda. These were deliberate actions done by the National Resistance Movement. So when my sister Himbisue here is talking, he just needs to go back to the history of the NRM and see the strategic path. Where did we come from and how do we reach where we are? And now let me go to the elections, because I just wanted to use that to emphasize the contribution of the National Resistance Movement.
The feel-good factor.
I want to tell you that the NRM is operating in the Uganda, where we still have people like MCC who don't want to paint even when they have the paint and the color. They think by complimenting what NRM has done, they will be failing. Just 2 days ago, the National Unity Platform set up a committee of eminent leaders in the National Unity Platform to go and conduct investigation in the malfeasance which was taking place in the National Unity Platform. Because one of the senior leaders came out, Haji Sebagala, and he cried foul of what was happening in the National Unity Platform. So this is the same Uganda where we still have people, members of the National Resistance Movement, who want to win without using the register, who want to cheat an election before they do this. But it is a responsibility of us who are in administration to ensure that we have regulations and we must follow them. My sister has talked about the audit of the exercise. I will strongly ask that through your other contacts, if you can do your independent audit about what happened in NRM, would be interested in reading that report. If there was any NGO in Uganda, private researcher, who does an investigation about what happened. Because when we investigate, we may use partisan NRM people who had vested interest in the election, who wanted to win, and they may write to us biased reports.
But we understand you have put in place a tribunal which is partly going to investigate some of these issues.
The tribunal is not going to do an investigation for purposes of finding out the post-election things that we need for improving the future systems. The immediate requirement for a tribunal is that people are going to complain. It is an arbitration or judicial mechanism for justice to be found to those who may be having complaints. We shall use their judgment also to find out how it is going to affect future elections and how we can use it to improve elections. But itself alone is not going to be enough. How about election areas where there will be no complaints? Because we are going to have constituencies where people will not come to the tribunal. Yet there are things that happen that the elections that we must be interested in. Now that you have mentioned it, could be, I'm going to raise it the top management of the party so that we could institute our own investigation. But when you do it internally, it will be subjected to the vagaries of that, because we are biased, we are NRM. Some district NRM leaders may not want to tell us the real truth about what happened in the areas. That's why we shall rely on the media the reports that you have been doing, the clips that you have been circulating about social media. But now going forward, this election is far much different from the elections that we have had before. You have heard my sister here talking about the register, even when it may not have been followed to the letter in some of the places. But in many areas, the register was used. Secondly, it exists. The third thing is that this was a humongous exercise. Like my sister Himbiswe told you. This election is bigger than the national elections. Because the national elections is well facilitated with the resources approved by Parliament. For us, we are running an election in 72,000 villages in Uganda. Yet the national election, their polling stations are less than that. So, even when we could have done better, let me hope that the population will understand and see the challenges and the limitations we could have had as a party and as the individuals that we use. One of the challenges that is going to affect us mainly is the reliance on polling officials who are themselves resident in the areas where they live. Some of these are polling agents of the people, I mean they are campaign agents of some of the contenders. Yet, they are coming to preside over an election.
They're already biased.
They have their internal biases. These are things that we have known. That is why there was an attempt to change, to shift them at the very late moment to ensure that sanity and stability and perhaps trust is built amongst the population. But could be it wasn't done or could have been done better than what has happened. So I want to tell the population, including my friends and the people who are listening to us, that NRM is operating in the same environment where we still have people who want to abuse their offices. Others want you to abuse power.
But as a ruling party, you should be different from others. That's what we are saying.
That's why you had her complimenting.
After almost 40 years in power.
The ruling party, to have people who vote out ministers, even when the minister has the guns, that's
empowerment on the part of the voter. But we are looking at these excesses, violence, issues of rigging here and there.
So when you look at violence, this time, there was violence before the elections, there was a lot of violence and some people died. And because of that, forewarned is forearmed. It enabled the Secretary General to work up with the National Chairman, who is also the Commander-in-Chief, and the Inspector General of Police and the structures of government to put a system put a mechanism that enabled us to have an election without many incidents. In America, where the democracy comes from, you saw what happened the other time when President Trump lost an election. There was an attempted insurrection, and some people died. How about Uganda, where people still operate and a general is contesting and may want to use his leverage and because he's being guarded by military men, or he himself is a serving officer, or just recently retired? How does the population relate? But when the people can be courageous enough to vote out a general, you have seen generals losing elections in Uganda. You just ask yourself, how do people do it when they are not being voted by soldiers? So we could have our weaknesses as a party. We are going to build on the success that has been realized in these recent elections to see how best we can do better in the future. But I want to tell you that the national resistance movement transformation which started is for real. Power belongs to the people. They make these decisions. We are not like other decisions who say people power, but when it comes to giving flags, it is determined under the bench or under the table.
I think mechanisms are determined by the constitution of a respective political party.
Which vote when Farida Nambi was getting a flag in the Kawempe North by-election early this year? Was there an election? Which table did they sit it?
There was consensus, and it's one of the allowed.
Wasn't it
in the constitution of NRM?
Why did Hanifa Kaladi run if there was consensus? Wasn't it an under-table decision?
She disagreed.
So you agree that consensus is a democratic...
She disagreed.
No, what you are saying, the consensus, you are saying under the table, consensus is a known standard.
Yes, consensus, but when you say people power and they didn't allow the people to determine, like we have been doing now.
What happens? Okay, the people determine in Remiaga.
We need to go for a break, but during the course of the discussion, actually, we'll need to understand, we'll need to, analyze how NUP does it and how the NRM.
Let me tell you.
To understand clearly.
Let me answer it right away.
How NUP actually does it. I think you need some more time. We need to go for a break.
Okay.
When we return, we'll be looking at this issue. But we want to encourage the listener to actually be part of this discussion. Share your views with us by the WhatsApp line 0703 090. Tell us what you think about what we are discussing. At the moment, we are looking at what happened in the NRM primaries and the outcomes. Next, when we return, we'll try to break down some of these issues. Election violence. We want to look at those people who lost. What could have been the problem? The NRM has always had the problem of independence. They are now saying they are going to expel anyone who has participated in a primary and runs as an independent. Are they likely to do that? We'll tackle those issues when we return from this break. Well, we're glad that you're still with us on Spectrum Extra Live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. A panel of three: Honorable Emmanuel Lumala Dombo from the NRM, Mr. George Musisi from the National Unity Platform Party, and Charity Imbisiwe from the Electoral Laws Institute. And we know she has been also one of those election observers in this particular country. We're still looking at what happened in the NRM primaries. And we want to open up now the discussion, Charity. You did submit earlier that when given an opportunity, you'd like to expound on some of the issues that you put across and explain them further. Now, let me give you that opportunity and you begin tackling some of the issues and probably also respond to some of the issues Honorable Dombo has put across.
Yeah, of course, Honorable Dombo, for him, he has to celebrate his party. But now, let's dig deep into the election. If you read a man called Larry Diamond, he raises 4 tenets to a good democracy. And one of them is free, fair, credible elections. The second tenet he does raise is the question of respect for human rights, and the third one being the rule of law, respect for rule of law, and fourth being civic participation. So now I want us to weigh the NRM election against this backdrop. If you look at whether this election was free, fair, and credible, it was not free, fair, and credible. Why? Because of the issues that I raised. I said, if there is violence in an election, then the process cannot be credible. If there is bribery in an election, then the process cannot be credible. If there are deaths in an election, because elections are not supposed to be a do or die, then that election is not a good election. It means that that election needs improvement. The standard of that election is below internationally accepted standards. If there is a register and the register is not being followed, then that election has fallen below the acceptable standard. And if there is vote rigging, which you saw that at polling stations you saw different results, and at the end of the day the announcement which was coming in from the returning officers was different from what had been polled at polling stations. And now that is when I come to the numbers that I had been talking about. If you go to Kakumiro, where the Prime Minister was elected, the total number of voters is supposed to have been 123,789. Okay? The Prime Minister was voted by 101,649 voters. Now look at that number. 123,000 is the total number, and she is voted by 101,649. Now, 83% was what they gave her. And when you add up with the other voters, the other candidates that were along with her, we have one who has 2,163, we have one who has 1,800, we have one who has 18,052, and we have one who has 269. When you add these votes, they are more than the 123,000.
They are more than the people in the register.
Yes. So that tells you then that the register was not followed to the letter in some of the places and in many of the places. When you go to Magogo,
or the register was booked.
Magogo's constituency, you see 636,558 people voting for Honorable Magogo. Now, when you look at the register, this number already takes half the number of, not even half, more than 4/4 of the people on the register. And when you add up the votes of what was written on the NRM tally sheet, it is more than the registered voters. Now, I also wanted to dig a bit deeper into Katakwi. Katakwi is where our vice president comes from, but I will come back to Katakwi at a later stage to help Dombo. Now, let's look at the actual violence. Ntungamo municipality had violence where we actually saw Nkoni, these big sticks, held by the incumbent. Big sticks and real for beating each other. And that happened. People were beating each other, blood, bleeding. This really, if an election is happening, this should not happen. In Chisoro, there was beating, there was bullets, the bullets that you talked about. Masaka was fairly peaceful, but in Budaka we lost 3 youth, 3 people died. And there's a lady called Nakiria who said, no, now for me I have given up on the electoral process altogether. In Mitiana, there was too much controversy in that election that most of the people who had stood there withdrew and decided they will come back as independents. Ruchiga brought a totally new breed of people. It didn't have a lot of violence, but there were pockets of fighting and being beaten. Remiaga was a battle zone. Remiaga had a lot of beating and fighting, but we saw the police taking over Remiaga, but the results are now being contested. Igeme Nabeta is also contesting his results, having received 2,000, and the person that won him got 6,000. He contests those results, but the returning officer for Igeme Nabeta insists that they did a commendable job. We are yet to see what the NRM audit team is going to say about that process, but Nabeta came out saying, I'm going to lodge my complaint with the chairperson, who is the president. Now, in Luka was terrible. Luka, we had Estambayo, and we had masked policemen. I'm going to show them to you. They wore masks and took on the ordinary citizens in Luka.
And she lost.
And so the people began to demand the withdrawal of these military men from the election, because what they were doing were beating them and then pushing people onto the lines and standing behind these people. It was the military being used in Luka. Yes, she lost. And because she lost, that is why I had chosen to try and downplay it, because at the end of the people, the will of the people still prevailed despite the mechanization and the things that she did in Luka. And in Chisora, I have told you, in Mukono, the DPC ordered for the beating of one of the youths, and we need to know why was he beaten, why is he in hospital. We have many people in Mukono who are in hospital, just here in Mukono. Ntungama, I have told you about it. Budaka, I have told you about it. Kamuri, I told you that there was a lot of violence there. And I have also told you that in the following places, elections were cancelled in Namtumba district, mainly Busiki County, Busiki North, Bukono County. The woman MP is vacant up to now, and new elections have to be conducted for Namutumba. So when you see these things happening, even in Mbale, Hudu says he's coming to contest the results that was there. But I think for Hudu, it's because it was a close race. I was in Mbale. I saw what was happening in Mbale. You see, every time there's a tight race, you will get a feeling you're being cheated. But the team in Mbale tried their best to do a commendable job. I don't want to believe there was theft in that election, but I will wait to see what the NRM team will come up with. But for Mbale, because I was interested in Lydia Wanyoto and the work that she's been doing, I actually had my foot so much on the ground and did not catch a lot of
so you went to support Lydia?
Practices. Yes, Lydia is a fellow woman.
So in a nutshell,
So I told you that this
She's a
marriage
fellow
between
woman.
green and yellow is...
Is real. But then when I come to support you in Chira, then the
No,
marriage will
in
be
Chira you
green.
said you are conflicted. For Lydia,
then the
Anderson introduced you as a neutral person,
when
not
I
as a
come
person who...
to support you in Chira, it will be now a marriage between red and green.
And the
so in
children
a
will be
nutshell,
yellow.
on a scale
And the
of
children will
10,
be yellow.
On a scale of 10, NRM elections were
Not
below
International
acceptable
acceptable standard.
standards.
That is
So
it. That's
those
that's
elections
a contradiction.
were a whack. They need to do better in arranging their elections.
all right, Honorable Dombo, you want to respond very, very quickly?
You know, at times I fail to understand these land people, the way they analyze and they say things.
Well,
Because-
she has pointed out some of the things, including
Absolutely.
numbers not adding up with the
After she
register.
had said all that,
Mm.
her concluding remarks was that the will of the people,
Yes, the voters.
the will of the voters. So, what is an election intended to do? To communicate the will of the voters and the decisions the voters make. So, if the voters have decided, irrespective of these challenges, which we shall improve, may I think the process was credible, and you cannot therefore give on a scale of 1 to 10 and say it is below standards, and at the same time and say the will of the voters was demonstrated. So to me, I think she just fears because of her proximity to other areas and because
I think maybe you got her wrong, because I think she said in some places the will of the people prevailed, and she gave examples.
well, because he said the soldiers were in Luuka beating people
Yes, but
and the people voted. So where people, ordinary citizens like in Ntungamo, where somebody used the muini and there were no soldiers, people also fought.
I think what
I'm not surprised that actually that a member of parliament, first of all, it is surprising that a member of parliament would conduct himself in the way he did. I don't know what type of violence or what type of threat would make a member of parliament run on bare feet with a rosary in your neck and with a muini chasing somebody to beat, because that's setting a very bad example. I got surprised, and it is something that should pique interest. But later, I discovered that the people had also beaten the very member of parliament. So when you look at the circumstances, it is difficult to make conclusions here on radio until you have had the report from either side. Although, on the face of it, there are certain things that we should outrightly condemn because they are bad.
yes.
For us, as members of NRM, we take this criticism in good faith. The areas, by the time the commission comes out to cancel elections in an area,
Yes.
you know that they have recognized
Yes.
that has fallen below the standards in those areas. Where they have maintained the results, perhaps they are convinced that the performance was above in certain areas. But altogether, I want to tell you that this election was a better organized election than many that we have had under the National Resistance Movement. And I believe that going forward, we shall be able to improve the processes and even make it more credible given time.
Well, let's talk the issue of the register, because it's very crucial.
Honorable Dombo,
What could have
of my-
happened? Why did we have in some places the number of voters overshooting the register, like Charity pointed out?
I want to give Honorable Dombo feedback from one of the listeners. He says that it is true what I am saying, that you find a problem with the elitists because of the way I have put it. But this is what he says, that there was registered improvement in the conduct of elections compared to previous elections. However, those elections remain below expected standards of such a massive party and gigant that is well resourced. There is need for improvement in the conduct of those elections. The word of machinations or underhand schemes that were glaring in some places pulled down the standard of the election. So do you see? That's why I was telling you that you see, I was happy about the voter.
I want to.
And this is an NRM.
I want to thank the listener and for the feedback. We don't take anything for granted, and for us, when we listen in, we're going to retreat in in some areas and look at the performance and what exactly has happened, so that we seek the wise counsel of the leadership of the party on how best we should improve. Because some areas where the president had earlier advised that going forward we may need to introduce this digital
biometrics,
but the biometrics, so that we can be able to vote. But as a party, we don't have capacity now with the resources that we have to think that way. But that is something that has already been discussed, and the president has guided to say, can we look for resources so that we introduce the biometrics, so that we eliminate people voting twice. We can do a printout, find out who voted, and it will strongly improve the quality of the elections. But I want to tell you that, like that person observed, the process has improved.
That's what
It may not be perfect, but I want to tell you that it will become better going forward.
Right, Mr. George Musisi, I know in some circles in NUP, you are celebrating some of the people who are actually, defeated. They include some of the people that crossed from the opposition, and some of them actually crossed from your political party. I saw some comments on social media. Some members of your political party were actually jubilating.
Of course, the fall of Mr. Kagabo. There are two things here. One, and I want to take it up from what Charity was saying, that anything which you call an election, if you choose to put it on a pedestal of a democratic standard, there are known standards. But before you even go to the internationally known ones, there are some basic ones which are even our local laws. For instance, if you're calling something an election, then how can an election not follow a register? A register is a basic. How can you have an election? Last time they had primaries, they didn't have a register. They said if the person can identify you, then you can vote. If the also chairperson identifies you, that's how basic it was. Now this time they are saying, no, we have improved. Never mind that this is a party which has been doing this since 2006. They have been having since when we went to multipartyism. So I tend to look at the way NRM organizes, because NRM has in its power to organize a clean election. It can if it wanted. The only reason why they don't is because the cynicism, the general incompetence, the Gambanogu syndrome has eaten it to the core that it cannot have that election, even if they wanted. For instance, you saw, I gave you the example of the nomination of the Bukedia lady. You saw the nomination of Mr. Rashandi, who just defeated Sechikobo, apparently. Up to Sechikobo, I think, had a petition challenging his minimum education standards. And the very day he was supposed to appear, he came with a certificate from National Council saying, this person got a certificate from the UPDF in 1982. Never mind that the UPDF didn't exist, legally at least, in 1982. So the question is, the issues that bedevil the general elections managed by and organized by NRM cannot save their own farce of an election. Anyone who has participated in that election, in the primary election, will tell you two things. Because I have some friends who have run, some have won, some will tell you two things. That one, on top of mobilizing the people, you also have to ensure that you are declared. So it's not just, so how can you go into an election where it's not about how many votes you get, but you have to ensure that you are declared. And before the director comes here and just thumps that, we are getting better, for crying out loud, you've been at this for over 20 years. You cannot be making some of those basic mistakes.
Well, you talked about even the NUP process. And
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that in a minute because I know it's one of your favorite topics. The Ntungamo, 30 hours after the open voting, because it was lining up, 30 hours after, they have just declared, I think, a winner, about 30 minutes ago. In Isinjiro MP, despite the fact that it was open voting, they are yet to declare. I'm told even Bufumbira South in Kisoro. So how can an election, which was by counting, by lining up and counting the people are lining up, not have a winner, an outright winner over 30 hours later. Now, when it comes to this, the so-called, they love mirroring, saying, at least for us, we are better than NUP. By the way, if the intention of adult suffrage is to show the will of the people, then how can you notice, or how can you come to the conclusion that this is the will of the people in an environment of intimidation, of violence, and of outright rigging? How can you show the will of the people? By where we started from, we are eulogizing Justice Kanyihamba, who said that anything which falls below free and fair should not be an election. Democracy has many facets and faces. And in fact, parties all over the world come up with their own consensus. I can remind people here that in 2016, when President Trump beat Hillary Clinton, Hillary got more popular votes than Trump by over 2 million votes. She wasn't declared president. Now, a person would say, how can a person more popular elected not be president? We've seen some parties where you don't even vote the president. You vote for the party, and then the party sits and chooses who will be president. You've seen that, Honorable Dombo. So that is not autocracy. It's just the consensus they have come up to. Now, secondly, you cannot deny an outright fact in Uganda. And I know many people would wish to say that, no, despite the fact that NRM does that, you go and do it and test them. It's akin to telling a person that we know they are drunk drivers, but you go and walk in the middle of the road, because if NRM cannot allow a credible and free and fair poll internally, how more will it want to disrupt an internal poll of the NUP or any other opposition party? Because NUP, for this year alone, we've been raided at least 3 times. This year alone, we have just reached half of the year. When we had an election in Kawempe, out of the 10 candidates, only our candidate, even right on nomination day, was badly beaten. On nomination day, is working with about less than 10 people. And all his rallies were disrupted from the very first one to the very last one. So it is foolhardy for any person to think that, no, you go and test them. Because we know, like I told you, some of these issues we're talking about in primaries are recurrent. The interference of security agencies, we've seen Sechikubo kicking boxes before in Remiaga. It's a famous scene over 10 years ago. So some of the interference of security, the issues of falsified registers, the issues of declaring wrong people, they are recurrent, not only in the NRM, but so it is foolhardy for any serious opposition party, to think that you can fall into the trap of saying, no, you go for universal adult suffrage, just like NRM. In any case, even NRMs, like we've seen, it's not necessarily representative of the people. So what happens is that you go for the next best thing, that how best can you get the people's mandate through any other way, apart from, because to imagine that NUP is going to have an NRM-style primary, when NRM cannot even allow you fundraise properly, it would be really giving them too much credit, which they will not give the space, because from the onset I said there is no goodwill on the part of the NRM to organize a fair election with its competitors, or even internally, because like the last election in 2021, I chaired an appellate committee for people, just like NRM has aggrieved people, for people who are aggrieved with the Election Management Committee decisions. And trust me, the few people who brought petitions there and who turned out to go and contest as independents, indeed, they didn't even come up with, some of them even failed to get even 1,000 votes, despite the fact that they were incumbent members of parliament. I can give an example of the constituency of Kawempe North in 2021. One of the people who wanted the party flags was a person who was working at the party offices, secretariat, Mr. Chidandala, Sulaiman. It was found that actually the late Muhammad Segrinya was much, much more popular than Sulaiman. In fact, I remember people saying, how can you give the card to Segrinya and not Chidandala, who is an MP quality? But because the most popular person was Segrinya. The same was with Kawempe South, Bashir and Roy. So the issue is, how best can you come up with a system which is still representative, which is fair, which is transparent, and which ensures that any aggrieved person can get a recourse?
All right. How did Bashir perform?
let's go to...
he won. No, he won in the general.
But Ken, before Honorable
Did he perform?
All right, before Honorable Dombo comes in.
As Honorable Dombo comes on, I think one of the things that we must recognize is that there can never be a 100% clean electoral process. And that is why, with every election, we aspire to improve the next election. That doesn't also mean, and Dombo, don't try to confuse the listener by saying, I hate these intellectuals. The intellectuals are saying there is a standard. And the standard is what I told you, that the elections must be free, fair, and credible. That's the standard. So when it falls below that standard, then it means it has not met the required standard. However, it doesn't mean everything about the election was bad. No. That is why I disagree with George. You see, I disagree with George at one point, and I agree a lot with Dombo. Then I disagree with Dombo, and I agree with George. Because it is that the process cannot have been entirely bad. Number one, from this process, the voters spoke very clearly that even when they were given money, they ate money in some places and still voted otherwise. They told you in Rukunjiri, a man saw a boy he paid school fees for, but he lined up on the opponent's line and he said, Mutabani, Garka, come back here and line up behind me. The boy refused. Now that tells you that this voter was a statute. The voter knew the candidate he wanted and he went for that candidate. So you must be able to recognize that then there are these voters who stood by what they wanted and they got what they wanted. And so they celebrated. And so because the will of that voter was there and we saw it, and we saw places when NRM could not even interfere with that will of the people in terms of the number of ministers who were dropped. Those ministers had entitlement to military. They could have used the military. We've seen it before. And they could have taken the election. Nobody would have stopped them.
But in some cases, the military is against the ministers. There are some constituencies.
That is why. But as long as the people came out and in big numbers and were able to defend their vote and come with the people they wanted, for me, that is a point of celebration for the NRM.
All right,
now, I also wanted to point out as it comes that Mawogala West also had violence. Nakaseke North constituency, especially Kijumba village. I was going back on my small report. There were arrests, there were kidnaps, there were threats, there were intimidations, and there was targeted violence. So even these need to be, and that is why I called for the audit, and I'm happy that for you you've said, let us audit. Me, I'll be happy to work and audit and share a report with you. But I shared one in 2021, and Tango Doi did not do anything about the report. The only thing he picked out was the voters register. He's my teacher.
All right, let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll go to Honorable Dombo. We want to tackle the issue of independence. Will they actually be handled? There is a problem there because there's a potential for many to actually contest these elections and also emerge as independent candidates in the election. There's also the issue of security and the role they play in our election, given the new zoning that police has put in place. How will that be helpful going into the next election? Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We continue. Well, we're glad that you're still with us on Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. A panel of three: Honorable Emmanuel Lumala-Dombo from the NRM, Ms. Charity Kalebo. She's from the Elections Laws Institute. She's also an election observer. Mr. George Musisi from the National Unity Platform Party, vying for the position of Member of Parliament in Xtra municipality. Honorable Dombo, there's a concern about issues of independence. We understand your political party took a decision and said anybody who will vie after participating in the primaries is likely to be expelled. That's what your guidelines say. That's what your constitution say as the NRM. Is NRM ready to live to that particular position? Are we likely to see people who decide to run as independents being expelled?
Well, I want to thank you very much and my colleagues for their observations. Some of the issues they raise just obvious truth, because we have ourselves witnessed them, and we can only say we shall make a follow-up on them. On the specifics, like Kakumiro, where Madam Mahimbisiwa alleges that the number of people who voted was more than the total number of people in the register. These are only things which you can follow up and establish and find out whether it is true. And if so, what could have happened. It is the same thing for Honorable Magogo in his constituency, High Excellency the Vice President, where you also allege that perhaps the voters could have been more than what happened. But these are the things we said we shall progressively go on to improve, but we shall also wait for the petitions. Because if there is anybody who feels that there has been cheated out, there is a mechanism through which a redress could be generated. And if nobody petitions, then some of the things may be difficult for us to follow and cancel the elections when there is no complainant. But to me, I take the things in good faith. For the independents, early this year we had a meeting with the president and the national chairman of NRM, and one of the members in the meeting strongly proposed and said, Your Excellency, is it time we reverted to what the Constitution provides for, especially when you are dealing with the people who go against the Constitution and then they run as independents or support other candidates other than the party, because that's what the Constitution says. And the president says, yes, that's very good because the Constitution is ours. But what will you do to pass somebody where you have voted without a register? Whose problem was it when somebody says you are unfair? You have voted without a register. And a credible election to be, there must be a register. So the president said we shall revert to the Constitution, but let us put right the internal systems first, because that's where the beginning should be, internally on our part. That's why he allowed us to use the party money to do a register and follow up the processes as we did. How credible it has been and how did it improve the results? We are going to do an internal evaluation and look at the processes and get the reports. But I'm very sure that this election has been much better because we had the register. And because we knew we are going to use a register, this time we introduced certain things. You had to prove that you're a member of NRM before you are nominated. People had to get a printout of the slips to prove that you are a member of the NRM. That is something that was an introduction. To really encourage people to ensure that they check the register to know that they are members of the NRM. Secondly, the elections have been conducted. We're waiting for the petitions, and we have set up a committee. Apart from the tribunal, we also have a reconciliation committee which is going to split up and move the various parts of the country and talk to the various candidates. At times, you may have been cheated out. The consequences may be worse for the party if you choose to go into acrimony, but you may choose to say, after all, Uganda is not ending today. Let me wait, I'll contest again. You have seen people who have been re-elected. People have been re-elected. You talked of that young man, that woman who was asking Professor Kamuntu that my son was studying here, you were a minister. Instead of asking Kamuntu, he should just bring his son to contest with Kamuntu and defeat him. Because that's what democracy does. Now the man started. The only good thing with the Professor Kamuntu's constituency, which I admire, is one. That constituency belongs to 3 people. One is an engineer, the 2 are professors. Not many Ugandans have that manpower. In Uganda here, look at many constituencies. They are represented by people whom you can't understand, even you don't know whether they can make any meaningful contribution in parliament. So to remove a professor and you bring a professor, we must applaud the people of Professor Kamuntu's constituency. To us, the independents, we are going to try as much as possible to do reconciliation. Where reconciliation fails, people will go to the tribunal and we will seek justice based on the evidence that will be provided. But even when the tribunals make decisions, some people may not be satisfied with the decisions of the tribunal. So the reconciliation committees will still be very important, and we shall go on to do civic education and tell people that parties are more important. Let us come back and galvanize the party and defeat these other people first. then we can go back and do the in-house dealing with the things. We believe that many members of the NRM are likely to believe this and to take it up because it is the right thing to do.
All right. Let me come to you, Mr. Msisi. Mr. Msisi, and I want to begin with you on the issue of security and the elections very quickly. We saw this week the police coming out and telling us they had finally come up with a mechanism that they think will help to deal with the problem of election violence. It includes responding in time to incidents that occur, but also using counterintelligence measures to be able to avert certain things from happening. Your quick response to that. Does this help somebody who has been concerned about election-related violence?
Of course, I would not ordinarily begrudge the internal administrative mechanisms of police. If the management feels that this is the best way of policing, ordinarily I wouldn't begrudge. For me, the bigger concern is what is outside police. I want to bring an analogy of a report which was launched this week by GLIS, Global X Institute for Strategic Studies, which noted that the country has been overly militarized in almost every aspect. And why I'm bringing it in relation to policing, under our laws, police should do all policing work, in terms of investigating crime, fighting crime, preventing crime, and so on and so forth, and prosecuting crime together with the DPP. What is happening today is that most of those duties have been almost ceded to the army. This is true, especially when it concerns political activities. That when it comes to the elections, like we saw in the last election, like we saw in the election we had this year, one of the by-elections in Campaign North, that the army doing things which ordinarily should be basic policing work. And for me, I don't, why that, all those zones won't even matter so much is because of the environment, the context, the militarization that Bliss is talking about, but that is in everyone's view for everyone to see. I earlier gave an example that the incident which happened in Wemiaga, in this NN primary, where a soldier, shot dead a civilian, no one has been prosecuted. Never mind that it was in broad daylight. It was the suspect was from a known army unit, and it can easily be identified. And never mind that the topmost bosses at police have got to know about it, that to the extent that a person no less than the IGP had come to there. How comes we've not seen this person who shot, in whatever circumstances, prosecuted? It only shows one thing, and of course it comes at the backdrop of that ugly incident where army soldiers put a DPC at gunpoint in her office in Wakiso, and no one has been prosecuted. That came on the backdrop of army officers beating up a police officer in Lubowa to the extent of being hospitalized. No one has been prosecuted. That on the backdrop of an army officer who shot a traffic officer for stopping him, bringing him to order, and the person was even amputated. So it doesn't matter that police is trying its best to say that we're policing to be more efficient in elections. What concerns us is that the army is having a stronger hold over the police, is holding on choke, and it's doing basic policing work. For instance, in an election, and even if you look at the functions of the army, even the police itself now says, we will not hesitate calling the army, but you can only call on the army to play a supportive role where maybe you are overwhelmed. Why should the army come in at the closest of instances, for instance, to calm down 5 rioters? Why should the army come in? Why should we cede basic policing work to the army?
All right. Charity, let's hear from you on the issue of security and elections. This new setup that has been put in place by the police, will it help to address some of the perennial challenges we have seen in the election in terms of violence and security?
I think I want to first agree that in terms of litigation, we don't have a lot of jurisprudence around the question of mishandling of militarization in our elections. And we need that jurisprudence like yesterday. Why? Because every time there is precedent, and I think from Nambi's Kawempe North election and court ruling, what we see being upheld by the judge in that ruling is the right to vote. So now we have jurisprudence on the right to vote. Now the next area that we need a lot of litigation around is the question of policing, because militarization has lived with us in the election for quite some time now, and we have advocated that the military should be kept out of elections. So for me, I'm happy the Constitution provides for security being provided by the police. And what we see now is Uganda Police itself organizing to manage violence during the campaign period. You've seen Electoral Commission releasing an updated roadmap of where we have nominations now coming up early September. And we also have the presidential nominations pulled back from October to September. That means that the violence from all the pockets of the different candidates is starting like yesterday. We only have 1 month, and then you're going to be seeing all these things happening. So when you see the police organizing itself, the way it's organizing itself, I'm hopeful that the people that will be serving in these zonal police entities will be people who actually are the police and not military within the police. Because we have also had an issue where we have military men have been recruited into the police and they operate from within the police. So they are not lenient with the public, and that's why we see a lot of bloodshed. We saw the 2021 election and people dying, all those things that we saw on the street, and violence, and the audits have not been done. But this, which has been planned by Byakagaba, is a good initiative. I do commend Uganda Police for doing it. What we need to know is that this is actually police and not military men in police uniforms, and that Ugandans can be guaranteed of justice when being held by the police, because the police is supposed to be lenient with the public. They're supposed to understand that elections, by their very nature, are very contentious processes. That is what was happening with the NRM as well, that when I contest your views, we might end up fighting. So the processes are contentious, and because they are contentious, they require a person that is balanced, and that person that is balanced is the police. And so, since this is the position of Uganda Police, may the military keep off.
All right. Honorable Tombo, on this new arrangement of the police, will it help to deal with concerns of electoral security?
During the preparation for the primaries under the National Resistance Movement, the Secretary General convened a meeting at the NRM Secretary General, convened a meeting of senior police officers to raise to them the issues of concern within the National Resistance Movement, because he wanted a response to the letter which he had written to police informing them about the forthcoming exercise. And secondly, people had already been reported killed in some of the areas, and the Secretary General wanted to find out what course of action the police had taken. So we are privy to this report. The police gave us a copy of this report, this deployment, this structure of deployment, and was open and put it in public. This is public information. To us, this was very good, and I would encourage the other parties to learn from the National Resistance Movement whenever they have an activity to engage with the police, so that they can understand either they have a route to follow, they have a program that must be policed, so that that partnership can improve the security of the people of Uganda who may want to participate in our activities. And also, what this one does, it brings command and control closer to where the problems are. One of the biggest problems in security is reaction time. If we have an RPC in Bali controlling a region, and when you have a problem in the Tiringi, you must ring in Bali, which is almost 100 kilometers, by the time the RPC reacts, there would be a problem. So this nature of deployment, if it enhances the quality of security, to enable the people to participate in matters that concern them, this is something very good. Right. And especially if the police is going to take leadership, and then where they need the military, it must be the police that should request as provided for by the law.
All right. Now we are going to listen to the views that have come in from the listeners, the responses that they have shared during the course of this discussion. I'll be reading out some of these comments, and time allowing, we have to respond to them. Hello, Spectrum Xtra. It's clear that what Mr. Dombo is asking NUP to do was denied to them by the state by invading NUP headquarters while launching their youth elections. Then somebody writes and said, let Charity get the figures right. She's misleading. I don't know the figures that you read out.
They are on the DR form.
Somebody writes in and says, how can someone leading in Lwemiyaga, according to Radio Uganda, UBC News, and his opponent getting several zeros in some polling stations be declared a loser? The election was a joke.
That is NRM.
Good evening, panelists. A kind reminder to our leaders, they need to be reminded that elections are not a battleground. They are a platform for people to choose their leaders through a peaceful and fair means. This kind of disorder we witnessed yesterday reflects a dangerous erosion of decorum, discipline, and respect for democratic principles. That's a comment from a listener identified as Kasango. Then we have another comment. Election violence is now trademark of NRM. When you see tired leaders shedding tears to continue sticking on the job, then you understand the stakes. I thought UPDF had professionalized till I saw and heard a general calling his MP an idiot. We need to sanitize our politics, and voters should keep up and throw out whoever is not value-adding to the people. That's a comment from Emmanuel. The will of the voters should not prevail despite issues. It should just prevail. The will of the voters should not prevail despite issues. It should just prevail. That's a comment from Isaac. And then Mr. Musisi, does our NUP have a register? Why should you discuss about NRM, yet we don't know how our flag bearers are chosen, how they will be determined? That is David listening in from Kasokoso. Would you like to respond?
Yes, we only discussed NRM because it was the topic set by the producers and moderators of the show. If I'm invited to talk about NUP, like I was asked the question, I did. And yes, does it have a register? Yes, it has a register, which is in the process of being synchronized into by village, parish, divisions and constituencies, certainly. You know that we launched a membership drive over a year ago, and yes, we have a register. Right. The other question, the other part, I think I'd earlier answered it, the issue of flag bearers.
All right.
Yes.
Honorable Dombo.
Well, today I want to thank our listeners, and like I have acknowledged here, that some of these issues that have been raised by the panelists and the caller, and the people who have sent in their messages, they are factual. And there is not much we can do by arguing. The only thing we can do is to improve so that we make the quality of the elections better and create an environment for people to participate in credible elections, and when they are safe. In areas where they say people have gotten involved in the problems, we shall for now leave this matter to the tribunal. I don't want to preempt anything because it may be conflicted. I speak for the party. The tribunal will speak for itself. And when we have evidence and the information that we can pass the public without compromising any issues, we shall definitely do it. But me, I want to thank members of the National Resistance Movement, wherever they are, and the public which came in to cheer and the big interest. And even the civil society that is giving us credible information on how we can improve, that this is something that is very good. And I want to tell you, if you give us an opportunity to organize another election, we believe it should be much better than what has happened recently.
You've got opportunities for over 30 years, Honorable Dombo, and the elections just get worse.
No, I want to tell you that next week we have an election for the chairperson of LC5 and the district councillors. And the other week we shall have for senior for LC3s and the sub-county councillors. And in August we have a bigger election for the members of the Central Executive Committee. We believe that we are going to take into consideration some of the issues that you are raising that will elevate the credibility of the process, and so that
we make the
outcome to be more trusted.
Sometimes you work on orders, you always talk about orders. Sometimes you work on the orders. Last time some people were ordered to stand down for others.
Wasn't that the same thing Sevagala was complaining about NUP when you set up the committee?
Well, and what happened?
As the organization, we are working in the same environment.
Charity.
I'm happy about that. Although for Mawogola South, I found it sad that you asked Shatsi to stand down. And of course, Sodo has won. And Shatsi wrote and said, after contemplating seriously, I reconsidered the position because the party chairman asked me to stand down. She's a lady.
That is the leadership, and that is leadership.
You should have left.
Both at the chairperson's level,
No.
but also the honorable member herself.
You should
She
have.
showed maturity
but of course,
and development.
Charity, you're speaking like you've just come into the country. How did Sodo stand down last time? It was still a family meeting. It was a family meeting which decided that Sodo should stand down, and I think Sodo brought up a resolution, just like the late Oranya brought back a resolution that, last time I stood down things for you. So it was a family discussion, and I remember General Mohoz saying the Kaguta family sat and said Shatsi will stand. So
Madam
if the Kaguta family sits today and decides that Dombo should be exited.
About families, at times they may take us to discuss things that are not helpful. Because like we talked about Haj Sebagala, he was also complaining about family.
No,
you are being you are deflecting, the Director Dombo. You are deflecting.
Honorable,
No.
the more interesting thing that I was looking at was the participation of a woman. Women don't have parity yet. If you look at the number of representation in Parliament, still the males are more than women. So every time there is a woman that is showing this interest, although we have seen with NRM, you want to come on to tell me that more women have now.
Even what I have witnessed, the times I've witnessed President Museveni do, I will not be surprised if Madam Shatsi is not destined for bigger things in future to come. She's still young.
She is.
There's an opportunity to serve. Uganda is here. And I've witnessed.
You should have given her another constituency.
Well, get to the chairman.
Why didn't Sodo go for the bigger things?
Kenneth, I have had the listeners, someone saying the numbers I was giving were not proper. I have DR forms that we got from the various polling stations from NRM, and they're signed off by the returning officers in those places. That's where I'm picking these numbers from. So except the returning officers wrote the numbers wrongly, that is what we have on the DR forms. So the numbers, as I read them, is what is there. And I would be happy if the listener interested themselves in picking up more DR forms, do an analysis of the numbers. I always tell you, numbers don't lie. It's just like hips don't lie. The same thing we should do for national elections. In the national elections, please look at the numbers. How many polling stations exist? How many voters are...
You are now throwing the NM director of balance by.
the director here is cracking a joke.
Numbers don't lie.
Numbers don't lie. So the statistics, please pay attention to these numbers. That's why I keep saying always pay attention to the number of constituencies. When they tell you we're conducting elections in 519 constituencies, what does that mean? When they say we're conducting elections in 72,000 villages, ask yourself, how many polling stations exist in every village? How many of those polling stations are going to vote for the woman MP? How many of them are going to vote for the constituency MP? Because the numbers do vary. And once you look at the numbers, then you begin to see the gaps. And it's only when you see the gaps that you can speak authoritatively into an electoral process. Elections are also the number. Elections are the law. Elections are the process. So every time there is an issue on any of those, then you're tinkering on the credibility of the process. And so what I raised were what is on their DR forms. And I would encourage that you go back, check those DR forms, and confirm for yourself. And that's why I've encouraged the National Resistance Movement that let us do a proper audit of who was on the register, how did they vote, and how were they turned in. For Ibanda, I did see that before polling in some stations, people would be asked, are you on the register? Yes. And they were actually ticked with their names on the register. Right. But in Palisa,